In the early months of 1816, a creeping darkness swallowed the sun. Farmers across the northern hemisphere watched the skies with a deep and growing sense of dread. The spring season never truly arrived. Snow fell heavy in June, crushing young crops under a blanket of unseasonable frost. The natural order felt completely broken and reversed. Terrified people shivered inside their small homes, burning limited firewood while waiting for a summer heat that refused to come. A bizarre chill lingered over every quiet village. Reports emerged from distant lands detailing similar horrors. From the vast fields of North America to the sprawling rural estates of Europe, the devastating freeze spared absolutely nobody. Exhausted birds dropped dead from the freezing sky. Desperate farmers tried replanting their empty fields, only to watch delicate seeds rot in the unusually cold and muddy ground. Devastating famine quickly became an inescapable reality. Without grain harvests, bread prices surged past what ordinary families could afford. Hungry children cried through long nights of endless winter. Massive livestock herds perished in their wooden stalls. Unable to feed valuable animals, weeping owners faced the agonizing choice of slaughtering them or watching them slowly starve away. As essential food disappeared, massive riots erupted across crowded European cities. Desperate citizens attacked grain carts, stealing whatever meager supplies they could find in the chaotic market squares. Confused governments offered no solutions to the starving masses. Authorities deployed armed soldiers to protect wealthy estates, violently crushing the rebellions organized by starving and furious local peasants. Religious leaders preached about divine punishment and absolute doom. Frightened congregations gathered in freezing churches, begging for forgiveness while believing the ultimate end of days had finally arrived. Nobody actually understood what was causing this apocalyptic weather. Astrologers blamed unusual planetary alignments, while some isolated scholars suggested massive sunspots might have entirely blocked the precious warmth. The devastating real culprit remained entirely invisible to the suffering people. Far away in the remote islands of Indonesia, a sleeping giant had violently awakened the previous year. Mount Tambora erupted with unbelievable and cataclysmic fury during April. It was the most powerful volcanic explosion in recorded human history, shaking the entire planet with terrifying force. Millions of tons of toxic ash and sulfur dioxide blasted directly into the stratosphere. A massive shadow of thick volcanic debris quietly began spreading across the entire globe. High atmospheric winds captured the lethal chemical aerosol cloud. They carried this immense dark veil toward Europe and North America, creating a planetary shield against the warm sun. The suspended sulfur particles functioned like billions of microscopic mirrors. They steadily reflected crucial incoming solar radiation back into cold space, drastically lowering global temperatures almost completely overnight. Back in the dark forests of Switzerland, wealthy tourists sought refuge from the persistent gloomy rainfall. Among this trapped group was a brilliant young writer named Shelley. Confined indoors by the miserable freezing weather, her intellectual circle engaged in a friendly contest. They challenged one another to write the most terrifying horror story ever imaginable. The dark atmosphere of that year heavily influenced her racing imagination. She masterfully created Frankenstein, a haunting tale born directly from that unnerving and completely sunless tragic summer. Lord Byron also channeled the immense global despair into profound poetry. He wrote Darkness, a bleak literary vision depicting the ultimate extinction of all humanity through relentless freezing. Across the ocean in America, farmers abandoned their barren fields. Many families packed their meager belongings into wooden wagons, seeking a better life out in the New West. This massive, desperate migration reshaped the young and growing nation. States like Indiana and Illinois saw populations explode with freezing refugees who were fleeing the starving eastern seaboard. In Asia, the disrupted monsoon cycles caused devastating cholera outbreaks. The bacterial disease swept violently through crowded cities, adding plague to the terrifying list of recent modern calamities. Chinese provinces experienced massive floods during the bizarre summer months. The crucial rice harvests were entirely destroyed, leaving millions of peasants facing sudden death by acute widespread starvation. In Ireland, constant freezing rains washed away the potato crops. Starving families wandered the muddy roads, desperately searching for any remaining scraps of rotting food or edible vegetation. The immense suffering united poor communities in shared human misery. People formed soup kitchens to feed the weakest children, though resources were always dangerously scarce and completely insufficient. Crime rates exploded as desperation easily overpowered basic moral laws. Prisons overflowed with ordinary men who had stolen merely to keep their freezing families alive another cold day. Horses were slaughtered for meat when they could not work. Streets normally bustling with merchant carts fell entirely silent, as commerce ground to a painfully slow economic halt. The lack of horses inspired a curious German inventor eventually. Karl Dries created an early wooden bicycle to replace the dying draft animals across his starving European country. The atmosphere painted incredibly vivid and bizarre sunsets every evening. The suspended volcanic ash scattered sunlight in highly unusual ways, creating burning yellow skies above the darkened cities. Famous landscape painters unknowingly captured this tragic atmospheric chemical event. Their beautiful oil canvases documented the fiery skies that masked the profound global misery happening directly underneath them. Scientific communities lacked the proper instruments to measure this phenomenon. Meteorology was still in its simple infancy, relying mostly on local observations rather than vast global data networks. Newspapers of the period frequently published wild and conflicting theories. Some blamed lightning rods for draining atmospheric electricity, while others cited deep earthquakes as the ultimate secret cause. Indigenous peoples observed the severe changes with deep traditional concern. They recognized the failing ecosystems and desperately modified their hunting patterns to survive the terrifying endless frozen winter. New England suffered immense economic losses during this freezing period. Ships stayed anchored in gloomy harbors as the crucial agricultural export markets completely collapsed under the heavy frost. Political instability threatened empires that had survived many previous wars. The intense lack of resources forced fragile governments to carefully reconsider their expensive foreign policies and international treaties. Epidemics spread rapidly along the newly established international trade routes. Weakened by severe malnutrition, poor urban populations proved incredibly vulnerable to diseases like typhus and persistent fatal dysentery. Doctors struggled to treat the rising tide of sick patients. Their simple medical remedies proved totally useless against conditions directly caused by immense cold and profound widespread starvation. Scavenging became a daily chore for previously wealthy merchant families. Those who once lived comfortably now traded expensive jewelry for small sacks of dirty grain or rotten potatoes. Graveyards expanded rapidly outside the boundaries of many major cities. Digging graves in the completely frozen earth was exhausting work for the surviving thin and weak sickly laborers. The tragic event demonstrated how fragile human civilization actually is. A single invisible alteration in the global atmosphere nearly pushed modern society toward a total state of collapse. Without modern global communications, nobody could understand the connected tragedy. European peasants never knew that American farmers and Chinese laborers were simultaneously experiencing the exact same deadly nightmare. Speculators hoarded whatever surviving crops they could hide in warehouses. This immense greed artificially inflated prices even further, condemning thousands of poor citizens to a painful slow death. Some local magistrates attempted to strictly regulate the grain markets. However, these desperate governmental interventions usually arrived far too late to save the most vulnerable starving hungry populations. Entire villages simply ceased to exist by the late autumn. Abandoned wooden houses stood empty as freezing winds howled through the broken windows of completely deserted ghost communities. Diaries written during this terrible time reveal a profound hopelessness. People genuinely questioned if the warm sun would ever return to bless their frozen and dying agricultural lands. The darkness sparked strange and mystical cults in rural areas. Desperate men practiced ancient pagan rituals, hoping a blood sacrifice might appease the angry spirits of frozen nature. Wolves became bolder as their natural forest prey quickly perished. Starving packs descended upon quiet farms, attacking weakened livestock and occasionally hunting exhausted and unprotected lonely human travelers. Even the ocean seemed completely disturbed by the sudden cold. Fishermen pulled up empty nets, reporting that fish had mysteriously vanished into the deeper and much warmer waters. The massive ash cloud slowly began to dissipate by winter. However, the incredible damage to human civilization was already done, leaving millions dead from acute starvation and disease. It took over a century for modern science to finally connect the Indonesian eruption with the devastating global weather anomalies experienced during that notoriously dark and freezing year. Ice cores drilled from deep Arctic glaciers eventually revealed the definitive truth. Thick layers of trapped volcanic sulfur perfectly matched the precise timeline of the Great Global Freeze. Tree rings from ancient global forests also confirmed the disaster. The narrow growth patterns documented a terrible season where trees essentially stopped growing due to prolonged extreme cold. Mount Tambora remains an active and incredibly dangerous sleeping volcano. It stands as a terrifying silent monument to the fragile balance of our interconnected and highly vulnerable atmosphere. Experts continually monitor the mountain for any signs of waking. They know that another identical eruption could easily plunge our modern world into another devastating and freezing darkness. Our current global food networks are remarkably complex and efficient. However, they might still fail entirely if the protective summer sun disappeared behind a massive toxic chemical shield. The year without a summer is rarely discussed in schools. Yet it stands as one of the most deadly and profound natural disasters in recorded modern human history. We often believe that human technology has conquered the elements. The chilling lessons of 1816 forcefully remind us that nature still commands ultimate power over our fragile existence. Next time you feel the warm sunlight upon your face, appreciate its rare and quiet reliability. Remember those millions who watched the skies and slowly froze completely away. The shadow of Mount Tambora will forever haunt our history. It is a chilling ghost story whispered loudly by the frozen winds of a forgotten and dead summer.